4 of the book club with The Alchemist. My name's Jen, the founder of the Sacred Wild, and I get the privilege and the gift of being here with Paul today.
Thank
you. Yeah, Paul, as you guys know, is hosting in the community and is there to allow me to keep my sanity and to allow the Sacred Wild to expand and be supported. So we are tag teaming it today, and we are going to continue our journey with The Alchemist. Quick reminder, book club will be on Wednesdays from here on out at 6:30 p.m. So shift that in the calendars. And these recordings are always posted in the Sacred Wild in the book club gathering feed.
So and I know it works because I have been able to catch up on the last two that I missed.
So you don't have to actually be here with us to be here with us, right? We're transcending time and space. Thank you, technology. So we are picking up where we left off, and that was on page 67. And do you want to go first?
Sure.
Go first?
Okay. I can start. The Englishman was sitting on a bench in a structure that smelled of animals, sweat, and dust. It was part warehouse, part corral. I never thought I'd end up in a place like this, he thought. As he leafed through the pages of a chemical journal, 10 years at the university, here I am in a corral. But he had to move on. He believed in omens. All his life and all his studies were aimed at fighting the one true language of the universe. First, he had studied Esperanto, then the world's religions, and now it was alchemy. He knew how to speak Esperanto. He understood all the major religions well, but he wasn't yet an alchemist. He had unraveled the truth behind important questions, but his studies had taken him to a point beyond which he could not seem to go. He had tried in vain to establish a relationship with an alchemist, but the alchemists were strange people who thought only about themselves and almost always refused to help him. Who knows? Maybe they had failed to discover the secret of the master work, the philosopher's stone, and for this reason kept their knowledge to themselves. He had already spent much of the fortune left to him by his father, fruitlessly seeking the philosopher's stone. He had spent enormous amounts of time in at the great libraries of the world, and had purchased all the rarest and most important volumes on alchemy. In one, he had read that many years ago, a famous Arabian alchemist had visited Europe. It was said that he was more than 200 years old, and that he had discovered the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. The Englishman had been profoundly impressed by the story, but he would never have thought it more than just a myth, had not a friend of his, returning from an archaeological expedition in the desert, told him about an Arab that was possessed of exceptional powers. He lives at the Alchemist Fayyum oasis, his friend said. And people say that he is 200 years old and is able to transform any metal into gold. The Englishman could not contain his excitement. He canceled all his commitments and pulled together the most important of his books. And now he was here, sitting inside a dusty, smelly warehouse. Outside, a huge caravan was being prepared for a crossing of the Sahara and was scheduled to pass through Al Fayoum. I'm going to find that damned alchemist, the Englishman thought, and the odor of the animals became a bit more tolerable. A young Arab, also loaded down with baggage, entered and greeted the Englishman. "Where are you bound?" asked the young Arab. "I'm going into the desert," the man answered, turning back to his reading. He didn't want any conversation at this point. What he needed to do was review all he had learned over the years, because the alchemist would certainly put him to the test. The young Arab took out a book and began to read. The book was written in Spanish. That's good, thought the Englishman. He spoke Spanish better than Arabic. And if the boy was going to Al-Fayum, there would be someone to talk to when there were no other important things to do. That's strange, said the boy, as he tried once again to read the burial scene that began the book. I've been trying for 2 years to read this book, and I never get past the first few pages. Even without a king to provide an interruption, he was unable to concentrate. He still had some doubts about the decision he had made, but he was able to understand one thing. Making a decision was only the beginning of things. When someone makes a decision, he is really diving into a strong current that will carry him into places he have never dreamed of when he first made the decision. When I decided to seek out my treasure, I never imagined that I would wind up working in a crystal shop, he thought. And joining this caravan may have been my best decision. But where it goes is going to be a mystery to me. Nearby, the Englishman, reading a book, he seemed unfriendly. He had looked irritated when the boy had entered. They might even have become friends, but the Englishman closed off the conversation. The boy closed his book. He felt that he didn't want to do anything that might make him look like the Englishman. He took Urim and Thummim from his pocket and began playing with them. The stranger shouted, Urim and Thummim? In a flash, the boy put them back in his pocket. They're not for sale, he said. They're not worth much, the Englishman answered. They're only made of rock crystal, and there are millions of rock crystals in the earth. But those who know about such things would know that those are Urim and Thummim. I didn't know that they had them in this part of the world. They were given to me as a present by a king, the boy said. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he put his hand in his pocket and took out 2 stones that were the same as the boy's. Did you say a king? He asked. I guess you don't believe that a king would talk to someone like me, a shepherd, he said, wanting to end the conversation. Not at all. It was shepherds who were the first to recognize a king that the rest of the world refused to acknowledge. So it's not surprising that the kings would talk to shepherds. And he went on, fearing that the boy wouldn't understand what he was talking about. It's in the Bible, the same book that taught me about Urim and Thummim. Those stones were only from the stones were the only form of divination permitted by God. The priest carried them in a golden breastplate. The boy was suddenly happy to be there at the warehouse. Maybe this is an omen, said the Englishman, half aloud. Who told you about omens? The boy's interest was increasing by the moment. Everything in life is an omen, said the Englishman, not closing the journal he was reading. There is a universal language understood by everybody, but already forgotten. I am in search of that universal language, among other things. That's why I'm here. I have to find a man who knows that universal language, an alchemist. The conversation was interrupted by the warehouse boss. You're in luck, you two, the fat Arab said. There's a caravan leaving today for Al-Fayum. But I am going to Egypt, the boy said. Al-Fayum is in Egypt, said the Arab. What kind of Arab are you? That's a good luck omen, the Englishman said, after the fat Arab had gone out. If I could, I'd write a huge encyclopedia just about the words luck and coincidence. It's with these words that the universal language is written. He told the boy it was no coincidence that he had met him with Urim and Thummim in his hand, and he had asked the boy if he, too, were in search of the alchemist. I'm looking for a treasure, said the boy, He immediately regretted having said it, but the Englishman appeared not to attach to any importance to it. In a way, so am I, he said. I don't even know what alchemy is, the boy was saying when the warehouse boss called to them to come outside. And I'll pass.
All right. I'm the leader of the caravan, said a dark-eyed, bearded man. I hold the power of life and death for every person I take with me. The desert is a capricious lady, and sometimes she drives men crazy. There were almost 200 people gathered there and 400 animals, camels, horses, mules, and fowls. In the crowd were women, children, and a number of men with swords at their belts and rifles slung on their shoulders. The Englishman had several suitcases filled with books. There was a babble of noise, and the leader had to repeat himself several times for everyone to understand what he was saying. There are a lot of different people here, and each has his own God. But the only God I serve is Allah, and in his name I swear that I will do everything possible once again to win out over the desert. But I want each and every one of you to swear by the God you believe in, that you will follow my orders no matter what. In the desert, disobedience means death. There was a murmur from the crowd. Each was swearing quietly to his or her own God. The boy swore to Jesus Christ. The Englishman said nothing. And the murmur lasted longer than a simple vow would have. The people were also praying to heaven for protection. A long note was sounded on a bugle, and everyone mounted up. The boy and the Englishman had bought camels and climbed uncertainly onto their backs. The boy felt sorry for the Englishman's camel, loaded down as he was with the cases of books. There's no such thing as coincidence, said the Englishman, picking up the conversation where it had been interrupted in the warehouse. I'm here because a friend of mine heard of an Arab who. But the caravan began to move, and it was impossible to hear what the Englishman was saying. The boy knew what he was about to describe, though. The mysterious chain that links one thing to another. The same chain that had caused him to become a shepherd, that had caused his recurring dream, that had brought him to a city near Africa to find a king and to be robbed in order to meet a crystal merchant. And the closer one gets to realizing his personal legends, the more the personal legend becomes his true reason for being, thought the boy. The caravan moved toward the east. It traveled during the morning, halted when the sun was at its strongest, and resumed late in the afternoon. The boy spoke very little with the Englishman, who spent most of his time with his books. The boy observed in silence the progress of the animals and people across the desert. Now everything was quite different from how it was the day they had set out. Then there had been confusion and shouting, the cries of children and the whinnying of animals, all mixed with the nervous orders of the guides and the merchants. But in the desert, there was only the sound of the eternal wind and of the hoofbeats of the animals. Even the guides spoke very little to one another. I've crossed these sands many times, said one of the camel drivers one night, but the desert is so huge and the horizons so distant that they make a person feel small and as if he should remain silent. The boy understood intuitively what he meant, even without having set foot in the desert before. Whenever he saw the sea or a fire, he fell silent, impressed by the elemental force. I've learned things from the sheep, and I've learned things from crystal, he thought. I can learn something from the desert too. It seems old and wise. The wind never stopped, and the boy remembered the day he sat in the fort in Tarifa with the same wind blowing in his face. It reminded him of the wool from his sheep who were now seeking food and water in the fields of Andalusia as they always had. They're not my sheep anymore, he said to himself without nostalgia. They must be used to their new shepherd and have probably already forgotten me. That's good. Creatures like sheep that are used to traveling know about moving on. He thought of the merchant's daughter and was sure that she had probably married, perhaps to a baker or to another shepherd who could read and could tell exciting stories. After all, he probably wasn't the only one, but he was excited at his intuitive understanding of the camel driver's comments. Maybe he was also learning the universal language that deals with the past and the present of all people. Hunches, his mother used to call them. The boy was beginning to understand that intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, where the histories of all people are connected, and we are able to know everything because it's all written there. Maktub, the boy said, remembering the crystal merchants. The desert was all sand in some stretches and rocky in others. When the caravan was blocked by a boulder, it had to go around it. If there was a large rocky area, they had to make a major detour. If the sand was too fine for the animals' hooves, they sought a way where the sand was more substantial. In some places, the ground was covered with the salt of dried up lakes. The animals balked at such places, and the camel drivers were forced to dismount and unburden their charges. The drivers carried the freight themselves over such treacherous footing and then reloaded the camels. If a guide were to fall ill or die, the camel drivers would draw lots and appoint a new one. But all this happened for one basic reason. No matter how many detours and adjustments it made, the caravan moved forward the same compass point, moved toward the same compass point. My page is there. We go. Okay. Once obstacles were overcome, it returned to its course, sighting on a star that indicated the location of the oasis. When the people saw the star shining in the morning sky, they knew they were on the right course toward water, palm trees, shelter, and other people. It was only the Englishman who was unaware of all of this. He was, for the most part, immersed in reading his books. The boy, too, had his book, and he had tried to read it during the first few days of the journey, but he found it much more interesting to observe the caravan and listen to the winds. As soon as he had learned to know his camel better and to establish a relationship with him, he threw the book away. Although the boy had developed a superstition that each time he opened the book, he would learn something important, he decided it was an unnecessary burden. He became friendly with the camel driver who traveled alongside him. At night, as they sat around the fire, the boy related to the driver his adventures as a shepherd. During one of these conversations, the driver told of his own life. I used to live near El Kairam, he said. I had my orchard, my family, my children, and a life that would change not at all until I died. One year, when the crop was the best ever, we all went to Mecca, and I satisfied the only unmet obligation in my life. I could die happily, and that made me feel good. One day, the earth began to tremble, and the Nile overflowed its banks. It was something that I thought could happen only to others, never to me. My neighbors feared they would lose all their olive trees in the flood, and my wife was afraid that we would lose our children. I thought that everything I owned would be destroyed. The land was ruined, and I had to find some other way to earn a living. So now I'm a camel driver. But the disaster taught me to understand the word of Allah. People need not fear the unknown if they are capable of achieving what they need and want. We are afraid of losing what we have, whether it's our life or our possessions and property. But this fear evaporates when we understand that our life stories and the history of the world were written by the same hands. Sometimes their caravan met with another. One always had something that the other needed, as if everything were indeed written by one hand. As they sat around the fire, the camel drivers exchanged information about windstorms and told stories about the desert. At other times, mysterious hooded men would appear. They were Bedouins who did surveillance along the caravan route. They provided warnings about thieves and barbarian tribes. They came in silence and departed the same way, dressed in black garments that showed only their eyes. One night, A camel driver came to the fire where the Englishman and the boy were sitting. There are rumors of tribal wars, he told them. The three fell silent. The boy noted that there was a sense of fear in the air, even though no one said anything. Once again, he was experiencing the language without words, the universal language. The Englishman asked if they were in danger. Once you get into the desert, there's no going back, said the camel driver. And when you can't go back, you have to worry only about the best way of moving forward. The rest is up to Allah, including the danger. And he concluded by saying the mysterious word, Maktab. You should pay more attention to the caravan, the boy said to the Englishman after the camel driver had left. We make a lot of detours, but we're always heading for the same destination. And you ought to read more books about the world, answered the Englishman. Books are like caravans in that respect. The immense collection of people and animals began to travel faster. The days had always been silent, but now, even the nights, when the travelers were accustomed to talking around the fires, had also become quiet. And one day, the leader of the caravan made the decision that the fires should no longer be lighted, so not to attract attention to the caravan. The travelers adopted the practice of arranging the animals in a circle at night, sleeping together in the center as a protection against the nocturnal cold. And the leader posted armed sentinels at the fringes of the group. I'll pass.
The Englishman was unable to sleep one night. He called to the boy, and they took a walk along the dunes surrounding the encampment. There was a full moon, and the boy told the Englishman the story of his life. The Englishman was fascinated with the part about the progress achieved at the crystal shop after the boy began working there. That's the principle that governs all things, he said. In alchemy, it's called the soul of the world. When you want something with all your heart, that's when you're the closest to the soul of the world. It's always a positive force. He also said that this was not just a human gift, that everything on the face of the earth had a soul, whether mineral, vegetable, or animal, or even just a simple thought. Everything on earth is being continuously transformed because the earth is alive and it has a soul. We are part of that soul, so we rarely recognize that it is working for us. But in the crystal shop, you probably realize that even the glasses were collaborating in your successes. The boy thought about that for a while as he looked at the moon and the bleached sands. I have watched the caravan as it crossed the desert, he said. The caravan and the desert speak the same language. And it's for that reason that the desert allows the crossing. It's going to test the caravans every step to see if it's in time, and if it is, we will make it to the oasis. If either of us had joined the caravan based only on personal courage, but without understanding that language, this journey would have been much more difficult. They stood there looking at the moon. That's the magic of omens, said the boy. I've seen how the guides read the signs of the desert and how the soul of the caravan speaks to the souls of the desert. The Englishman said, I'd better pay more attention to the caravan, and I'd better read your books, said the boy. They were strange books. They spoke about Mercury, salt, dragons, and kings, and he didn't understand any of it. But there was one idea that seemed to repeat itself throughout all the books. All things are the manifestation of one thing only. In one of the books, he learned that the most important text in the literature of alchemy contained only a few lines, and it had been inscribed on the surface of an emerald. It's the emerald tablet, said the Englishman, proud that he might teach something to the boy. Well, then why do you need all the books? Asked the boy. So that we can understand those few lines, the Englishman answered, without appearing to believe what he said. The book that most interested the boy told stories of the famous alchemists. They were men who had dedicated their entire lives to the purification of metals in their laboratories. They believed that if a metal were heated for many years, it would free itself of its individual properties. And what was left would be the soul of the world. This soul of the world allowed them to understand anything on the face of the earth, because it was the language with which all things communicated. They called that discovery the masterwork. It was part liquid and part solid. Can't you just observe the men and omens in order to understand the language? The boy asked. You have a mania for simplifying everything, answered the Englishman, irritated. Alchemy is a serious discipline. Every step has to be followed exactly as it was followed by the masters. The boy learned that the liquid part of the master work was called the elixir of life, and that it cured all illnesses. It also kept the alchemist from growing old. And the solid part was called the philosopher's stone. It's not easy to find the philosopher's stone, said the Englishman. The alchemists spent years of their lives, the alchemists spent years in their laboratories observing the fire that purified the metals. They spent so much time close to the fire that gradually they gave up their vanities of the world. They discovered that the purification of the metals had led to a purification of themselves. The boys thought about the crystal merchant. He said that it was a good thing for the boy to clean the crystal pieces so that he could free himself from negative thoughts. The boy was becoming more and more concerned that convinced that alchemy could be learned in one's daily life. Also, said the Englishman, the philosopher's stone has a fascinating property. A small silver sliver of the stone can transform large quantities of metal into gold. Having heard that, the boy became even more interested in alchemy. He thought that with some patience, he'd be able to transform everything into gold. He read the lives of the various people who had succeeded in doing so. Hellevitus, Elias, Fucanli, and Gerber. They were fascinating stories. Each of them lived out their personal legend to the end. They traveled, spoke with wise men, performed miracles for the incredulous, and owned the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. But when the boy wanted to learn how to achieve the masterwork, he became completely lost. There were just drawings and coded instructions and obscure texts. Why did they make things so complicated? He asked the Englishman one night. The boy had noticed that the Englishman was irritable, and missed his books. So that those who have responsibility for understanding can understand. He said, imagine if everyone went around transforming lead into gold. Gold would lose its value. It's only those who are persistent and willing to study things deeply who achieve the master work. That's why I'm here in the middle of the desert. I'm seeking a true alchemist who will help me to decipher the codes. When were these books written? The boy asked. Many centuries ago. They didn't have the printing press in those days, the boy argued. There was no way for everybody to know about alchemy. Why did they use such strange language with so many drawings? The Englishman didn't answer him directly. He said that for the past few days, he had been paying attention to how the caravan operated, but that he hadn't learned anything new. The only thing he had noticed was that talk of war was becoming more and more frequent. Then one day the boy returned the books to the Englishman. Did you learn anything? The Englishman asked, eager to hear what it might be. He needed someone to talk to so as to avoid thinking about the possibility of war. I learned that the world has a soul, and that whoever understands that soul can also understand the language of things. I learned that many alchemists realized their personal legends and wound up discovering the soul of the world, the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. But above all, I learned that these things are also so simple that they could be written on the surface of an emerald. The Englishman was disappointed. The years of research, the magic symbols, the strange words, and the laboratory equipment, none of these had made an impression on the boy. His soul must be too primitive to understand those things, he thought. He took back his book and packed them away again in their bags. Go back to watching the caravan, he said. That didn't teach me anything either. The boy went back to contemplating the silence in the desert, the sand raised by the animals. Everyone has his or her own way of learning things, he said to himself. His way isn't the same as mine, nor mine as his, but we were both in search of our personal legends, and I respect him for that. And I pass.
Awesome. The caravan began to travel day and night. The hooded Bedouins reappeared more and more frequently, and the camel driver, who had become a good friend of the boys, explained that the war between the tribes had already begun. The caravan would be very lucky to reach the oasis. The animals were exhausted, and the men talked among themselves less and less. The silence was the worst aspect of the night, when the mere groan of a camel, which before had been nothing but the groan of a camel, now frightened everyone because it might signal a raid. The camel driver, though, seemed not to be very concerned with the threat of the war. I'm alive, he said to the boy as they ate a bunch of dates one night with no fires and no moon. When I'm eating, that's all I think about. If I'm on the march, I just concentrate on marching. If I have to fight, it will be just a good day, just as good a day to die as any other. Because I don't live in either my past or my future. I'm interested only in the present. If you can concentrate always on the present, you'll be a happy man. You'll see that there is life in the desert, that there are stars in the heavens, and that tribesmen fight because they are part of the human race. Life will be a party for you, a grand festival, because life is the moment we're living right now. 2 nights later, as he was getting ready to bed down, the boy looked for the star they followed every night. He thought that the horizon was a bit lower than it had been because he seemed to see stars on the desert itself. It's the oasis, said the camel driver. Well, why don't we go there right now? The boy asked. Because we have to sleep. The boy awoke as the sun rose. There in front of him were the small stars that had been the night before, was an endless row of date palms stretching across the entire desert. We've done it, said the Englishman, who had also awakened early, but the boy was quiet. He was at home with the silence of the desert, and he was content just to look at the trees. He still had a long way to go to reach the pyramids, and someday this morning would just be a memory. But this was the present moment. The party the camel driver had mentioned, and he wanted to live it as he did the lessons of his past and his dreams of the future. Although the vision of the date palms would someday be just a memory, right now it signified shade, water, and a refuge from the war. Yesterday, the camel's groan signaled danger, and now a row of date palms could herald a miracle. The world speaks many languages, the boy thought. And with that, we will close. Again, another 22 pages. Isn't that crazy?
That is pretty magical.
Oh man, I love this book so much. I forget how much I love this book, and there's something new every time I read it. Like one of those magical books that speaks the universal language and tells you something different at each part I'm in my life.
Enjoy the journey. That's what I kept hearing in that reading.
Mm,
It's the journey.
the the Englishman and the boy, I feel represent, and it's so fun that the Englishman is older and the boy is younger, but it represents the two different parts of my life because
Mhm.
the first part, I had my nose in the books. It was all about learning, it was all about understanding, it was all about just again in search of exactly like it couldn't use like the universal language, like that understanding of just understanding, wanting to know how everything worked, why things happened. And then in my research, in my study, it just led me to to the piece that it's not meant to be understood. It's meant to be experienced. And so a few years ago, that stepped me into a deeper part of my journey, one in which is similar to the boy, where the books are being put down, right? To say that as we're in the book club. Um, and it's not getting lost in the books or the podcasts or any of that nearly as much as it is in experiencing this moment. What is here for me? And being able to experience what I had researched and learned about, experience what I was in search of understanding. And in that experience comes the understanding. And I've been told like I have a gift with words at being able to describe the things that are hard to describe. And still, it doesn't do justice to the experience. With every word, part of that experience gets diluted, or convoluted, or taken away. Because again, it's the magic of the experience, the sitting in the silence, the watching of the transformation of the camel's moans, meaning danger, to now seeing the dates and seeing that you are going to be nourished and that there will be shade and that there is safety, and being able to savor that moment, no longer living in the past, no longer living in the future, but being right here, right now, because that is longer than forever. It's infinite. Like, this is where everything lives. And so it was neat to be able to like see that, like, yeah, I've lived both of those lives. And right now I'm just savoring and cherishing that second mountain. I haven't read the book yet. I started reading the book, but maybe that'll be another book that we read. But the second part of my journey, the second leg of my journey, where it is the experience, the festival, the party, the ceremony, the sacred, all of it, instead of learning about it.
It's cool watching the boy get glimpses of that present moment. And then, like right there at the end, he jumped back into, but the pyramids are still so far away. I really relate to the boy. Like I have glimpses of how beautiful, and the experience has been so amazing in this, in this last few years of the journey. And but there's always that going back to, yep, but the pyramids are still so far away. And it's funny to watch him get bigger glimpses of the silence in the night and the desert and being a part of the desert and the dunes, and then just that it always comes back. But it's cool to watch the spaces in between get bigger. It's kind of like with meditation practice or anything, in that realm of it, being able to sit in the stillness and the silence. It was so hard in the beginning. The practice of just sitting down for a couple minutes in silence was so hard. And now it's like this savoring that I get to sit in the silence, and I get to hear the wind. I opened up the door this morning to run out and check the mail, and the wind was blowing, and it was just like I had this weird feeling of waking up camping. And just because the breeze was blowing through the trees, and then I could hear it from a couple houses down, you could hear how the wind was hitting the houses. And I don't know, it's been kind of a quiet monsoon this year, so I don't think I've had a lot of experience with it. And
Yeah.
it was just so present this morning, and it felt so amazing to be in that moment, just walking to the mailbox, and it is the simple things in life that really have the most profound impact. So it's a cool
Mm,
process.
that, yes, the simplicity. Oh my gosh, that has been such healing for me. That has been like such a path. I think it was Albert Einstein that said, if you can't describe what you're talking about in 3 sentences or less, then you need to do more learning because it is on this journey. Like I would get myself so confused, which is why it took me so long to even do this or create the community or be a coach or do anything because I would talk myself into confusion with all the words that I used and all the different lines and all the different, avenues of where to go and all of the things when it really is super simple. And I'm also taking back that phrase that it may be simple, but it's not easy. No, it really fucking is easy. It is simple and it is easy.
I just complicate it, I a lot of the time.
Well, it's always us that complicates it.
Right.
It's always us that complicates it. We have the stories, we have the beliefs, we have the thought patterns, and then those expand into actions and choices and behaviors. And, you know, those are what makes it complicated and hard. It's the resistance. It's not, what's that phrase? It's not the emotion that's painful or hurts or is hard. It's our resistance to the emotion. It's not the
Hmm.
experience, it's our resistance to the experience. Oh my gosh, that phrase, this, it's a story that's all written by the same hand. It's not a different story. Your story isn't written by a different person or a different entity
Hmm.
or any different than mine.
Right.
It is one continuous story that we are all a part of. So in those moments where I don't know what the fuck to do or where the fuck I'm going, can I trust that that is exactly where I'm meant to be? In that place of surrender because I don't know what to do. So I can't do anything and just be. Maybe that's the storyteller's way of saying, hey, I'm writing this story, not you. Let go, trust, surrender, allow. And when we allow ourselves to step back, then we get to witness that magic. Like they said, every caravan that we passed, we had something they needed and they had something we needed.
Huh.
That is life.
Right.
That is life.
Yeah. Yeah, you were talking in a post the other day about the we're all storytellers, and it
Mm-hmm.
really sank in because that is the reality. I've been telling, I don't give myself I don't know, I get so self-conscious about what comes out of my mouth and how I speak, and I don't most of my life I haven't liked the sound of my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean that in tone, although as well,
Mm-hmm.
but more my like I think you've heard me a million times talk about how I don't articulate well and how much I really appreciate how you articulate and learning
Mm-hmm.
to, just kind of letting that rub off on me. And in that post, I really sink into this space of I am really good at it and I do have a lot to bring to the table, and I don't always think I remember, and I don't always articulate the way I want to. And then when we're done, I'll be like, oh, I should have said this and this and this, but that's not what I said. And the story we had, the conversations we've had, the interactions are always perfect, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't give that the credit that it deserves. But reading that post the other day, it's been sinking in deeper.
Yeah.
There is something to offer there.
Yeah. And that's been, I lived like that for a long time. Oh, I should have said this. And oh, I
Right.
should have said this. And oh, I should have. And that for me, the experience of that I should have is the resistance to the perfection
Mm.
that is.
Right.
And so it I fell into that, like I was saying in my self-devotion post yesterday. I was asked to write a bio and an intro for a podcast I'm being interviewed on. And I started doing my normal thing. Okay, well, I'm going to write all of the stories. And, there is trauma and there is this. And I bought the book at 14 and I did the things and I did it. No. And then I deleted the like 4 or 5 paragraphs that I wrote. And instead of writing who I was or what brought me to who I am, I instead wrote who I am now and what I'm offering to the world.
Hmm. It made me cry this morning when I read that. Watching you evolve.
And that's the thing, is that letting go. I'm no longer thinking about what I'm going to say. I'm instead listening to what you say and knowing that when you end, there will be something that sparks me to begin.
Right.
And there will be a natural quietness that comes when the conversation
The
is
silence in the desert.
Yeah. And then we can just all savor in everything that just happened, the energy that was created, what we co-created, and we can sit in that and experience that without the words.
Right. Yeah, this book has been a blast.
And I believe that that is a beautiful space to end our time together today. I am super excited and super grateful to be here with each and every one of you. I am grateful to have this privilege, this opportunity to show up in a deeper way for myself and extend that to everybody that I meet along my path, and to deepen my practice of being a student to everything that comes my way. So thank you for being here with both of us today. I'll say anything.
No, thank you.
Have a beautiful day, my friends, and we will see you next time.
See you on Wednesday.